So it's day whatever of your state's shelter-in-place order, and you need some cookies. But you open your fridge, and you only have 1 tablespoon of butter. And you're being socially responsible by limiting trips to the store, so you improvise. It's out of situations like these that some of the best culinary inventions come about, and the recipe we're going to make today is no exception. This is a recipe that I created that I'm calling the Quarantine Magic Cookie. It's what we make when we take the ingredients we have on hand and do our best to make something yummy out of them. Let's make it keto. Cookies at their core are essentially mixtures of flour, sugar, and fat, usually having leaveners, emulsifiers, seasonings, and mix-ins added to differentiate them. The particulars of your ingredients can change, but as long as they're all represented in some capacity, you've got yourself a cookie. It was on this principle that I thought, well, maybe since I don't have any butter, I can substitute with something else. But the only thing that I had on hand was heavy cream, which is technically a fat, but if we add it on its own, we'll end up with cookie soup. But maybe we could reduce it into a sort of sweetened condensed milk? The second I thought sweetened condensed milk, I was brought back to being a kid and eating these things my dad used to make called magic cookie bars. They were a mixture of coconut, walnuts, chocolate, graham crackers, and sweetened condensed milk. We didn't have them often, but when we did, it was always a real treat. Looking around my kitchen, I found that even without the butter, I actually did have all the ingredients I'd need to roughly duplicate the flavor profile in a cookie. So that's what we're going to do today. For ingredients, we're going to need heavy cream, that 1 tablespoon of butter, Swerve, liquid stevia, almond flour, coconut flour, Psyllium Husk Powder, Kosher Salt, baking soda, Xanthan Gum, an egg, vanilla extract, walnuts, dark chocolate, coconut flakes, and shredded coconut. Phew. The first thing we're going to do is make our sweetened condensed milk. Start out with a large, wide pan. Whenever you're trying to reduce or condense a liquid, it's a good practice to go with a wider pan over one that's narrow. The point of reduction is evaporation, so the wider the pan, the more surface area there is for steam to escape, so the faster your liquid will reduce. You can still do this just fine in a narrow pan, it'll just take longer. Heat your pan over medium heat and add in your heavy cream, that 1 tablespoon of butter, a few tablespoons of Swerve, and a few beakers of stevia, and bring that mixture to a simmer. Once it's simmering, reduce your heat to low and begin the process of reduction, making sure to stir it every couple minutes or so to keep the milk fats from burning. Mine took around 15 minutes, but your pan and heat level will be different than mine, so don't go by time. Just keep stirring it every minute or so until it's reduced by about half and looks something like, well, sweetened condensed milk. While that's going, we're going to toast up our walnuts and coconut. You can make this recipe with any nut you like, but if you're going to use walnuts for their clearly superior texture, you need to first take a couple steps to make sure they actually taste good and don't end up sabotaging the rest of your recipe. Walnuts are a fatty nut, and because of that, they can go rancid if too old or not stored properly. So give them a taste first to make sure they still have a pleasant flavor. Even if they're not rancid, a lot of people don't like walnuts because of their inherent tendency towards an acrid, bitter, astringent taste. And that's really a shame, because walnuts don't actually have to taste that way. The astringent, mouth-itching quality we think of in walnuts is actually solely caused by two compounds called catechins and tannins, which are only found in the paper-like skin called the pellicle of the walnut and not in the nut itself. These catechins and tannins are the same compounds that make green tea bitter and red wine tart. You can taste it now, can't you? A lot of times in cooking, we actually want a little astringency to contrast with the other ingredients in our recipe. But in these cookies, I find that the skins can add an incongruently bitter note to an otherwise very sweet cookie, so I recommend removing some of the skin. While we could blanch them, I prefer to do this by toasting the walnuts, which serves double duty by not only loosening their skins, but also enhancing their flavor. Set your oven to 350 degrees, and then on a baking sheet lined with parchment paper, spread out your nuts on a single layer, taking up about half the sheet. We're going to reserve the other half for when we add our coconut later on. Be sure to break up any large nuts into smaller pieces. Pop those into your oven and set a timer for 10 to 12 minutes. 5 or so minutes in, take out the sheet tray and add your coconut shreds and flakes to the other side. We're going with two kinds of coconut to provide some interesting textural contrast. Toasting the nuts and coconut both enhances their pleasant flavors and allows them to stay a little crispier inside of the final cookie, which makes for a better, chewy texture. Go ahead and pop those back in the oven. And once they're looking nice and toasty, and your kitchen smells like toasted nuts and coconut, take them out of the oven. After they've cooled a little, rub the nuts in batches with a coarse towel to remove some of their skins. You'll be able to see the little flakes coming off as you do this. Don't worry if there's still a little skin left on, we just want to get the bulk of it. Finally, give the skinned nuts a toss in your sifter to remove any crumbs that might be holding on. Once you've finished that, give your chocolate a rough chop. I'm going with a chocolate bar here and chopping it myself. While we could use chocolate chips, I personally much prefer the uneven distribution and textural variety we get from chopping a bar into uneven chunks. The best way to do this is with a widely serrated knife. Flat-edged knives spread out pressure evenly, and so they require proportionally more force to cut through chocolate. Serrated knives concentrate pressure into their smaller points of contact, so the chocolate splinters a little more easily. I find the easiest way to chop chocolate is by starting at the corners and working my way in one corner at a time until all the chocolate is chopped. By this point, you're now ready to assemble the rest of your ingredients. First, however, you're going to want to pop your sweetened condensed milk in the fridge for a minute, just so any residual heat doesn't scramble our egg when we add it in. Sift together your almond flour, coconut flour, psyllium husk, salt, the rest of your swerve, baking soda, and xanthan gum. I found these tend to mix together to get the best chew, flavor, and aeration in keto cookies. We use the coconut flour, xanthan gum, and psyllium husk powder because of their tendency to absorb liquid and bind together, effectively taking the place of gluten in traditional cookies and helping trap the little pockets of air created by our baking powder. I happen to like my cookies moist and chewy, not crumbly or cakey, so adding these in really helps. If you don't have psyllium husk powder, just throw in a little more coconut flour and the recipe will still work. You just won't have quite as much of a chew in the final cookie. In a separate bowl, whisk together your now cooled sweetened condensed milk, a beaten egg, and vanilla. Then go ahead and whisk in half of your dry ingredients. To the other half of your dry mix, add your chocolate, along with your toasted nuts and coconut. Give them a quick stir, and then fold them into the rest of your batter. Coating our mix-ins in the dry ingredients before mixing them in creates a little more even distribution in our dough. Put the mixture in the freezer for at least 20 minutes. This helps us to achieve a crispier exterior and gooier interior in our final cookie, and also gives the coconut flour, xanthan gum, and psyllium husk powder time to hydrate and bind the dough together, making for a bit better cohesion in our final cookie. When you're ready to bake, preheat your oven to 350 degrees. Take your cookie dough out of the freezer and use an ice cream scoop to transfer your cookies onto the parchment paper lined baking sheet you used before. You can get anywhere from 6 to 12 cookies depending on how big you like them. I'm going for 6 here because I like my cookies big. If you have extra dough like I did, feel free to distribute it on top of any of the cookies that don't look quite as full. Finally, use your fingers to flatten the cookies out a bit, as unlike non-keto cookies, these won't spread when baked. Well, those already look gorgeous. Pop your cookies in the oven and bake them for 12 to 15 minutes, or until they're looking slightly browned around the edges. Here we can see they're almost done. Just another couple minutes and perfect. Let them sit on the tray for 2 or 3 minutes just to crisp up the bottoms, and then transfer your cookies into the freezer for about 5 minutes. The rapid decrease in temperature will help to preserve a gooey texture in the final cookie. Once the 5 minutes have passed, take the cookies out and transfer them to a wire rack to keep cooling down. Once they've cooled to room temperature, pour yourself a nice glass of your favorite nut milk and dig in. So that's it. Even though we didn't have enough butter to make a traditional cookie, I think what we improvised came out even better. These cookies are soft, chewy, crispy, gooey, crunchy in just the right way, and the flavor is so complex and delightful. These have quickly turned into one of my favorite recipes to make. So I hope you give them a try soon. Until next time.